just to explain what my topic is with a little bit more detail and explain why publishing is really important while you are doing your PhD. That's what I'm finding and how I feel. So I hope you'll get that from what I'm about to show you. Okay, so my topic is primarily about Indigenous education and improving educational opportunities for Indigenous people. So the question is it important to include Indigenous knowledge in pre-service teacher education? If so, why? And what should be included? Now I've come to this with 25 years of experience as an educator. So it's not something that's just popped into my head. So what's part of this, a big part of this, is my own identity as an Indigenous woman. And so my standpoint that's built from that identity and my experience in the education system, both as a student and then as a teacher. At the moment, my most recent paper that I've written, I'm going to present in September, and it's the background paper to my question and my PhD topic, so it's how I got there. And I'm presenting it at the Australian College of Educators conference in September. It's quite a difficult conference to get into, so I was very happy with that. And the paper actually reflects teaching best practice and Indigenous knowledge as teaching best practice. I'm actually a senior teacher with the Education Department, and in that role you're responsible for supervising other educators and making sure that what happens in the classroom is best practice and appropriate. So I'm very, very interested about the whole expectations, but also the technicalities of how we teach well. So anyone who knows about teaching, there's roughly 3 areas that you can kind of get right. Relationships, feedback as part of the teaching and learning cycle, and then having a deeper content knowledge so that you can break down to scaffold what learners might need at a smaller or a more basic level. So the paper talks about my interest and my love and connects those things to aspects of Indigenous knowledge and how that can actually be easily made. And then that's what led me to asking this question: should that fact that you can link and connect Indigenous with the Western be part of pre-service teacher education? So when I presented my proposal at my colloquium, this is what I laid out for everyone to look at. So the actual problem, which is, that there are consistently lower educational outcomes for Indigenous students. That's a generalisation. Not all Indigenous people have difficulty accessing education, but there are enough Indigenous students who have that difficulty that it's a problem for the Western education system. And it looks quite bad. There's no equity there. So how do we solve that? Continued efforts to improve haven't seemed to improve enough, and it results in low perceptions and low expectations of Indigenous education programs and delivery, and low expectations of Indigenous students. Why is it a problem? Well, because the national education system is based on Western knowledge, reflecting the dominant culture. Foucault, la Foucault, knowledge is power, and what we learn and what's deemed important to learn in schools is within the Western frame, okay? So Indigenous people are measured against that standard. Projects, programs, papers and findings, all of my literature review, and what I know as an educator for over 25 years is there's a distinct lack of Indigenous in the system. People can't identify and connect. Indigenous people can't. There are assumptions that are always a problem, and it's difficult to get people to understand the relevance of why Indigenous knowledge might be important and how that might help us to solve this problem. So how is my research, or how am I going to try and change this? By first looking to find and highlight the Indigenous. And I'm going to do that through specifically targeted methodology and methods, through the participants that I'm going to target to use, how I'm going to recruit those participants, the research and research findings itself will also help to shape that, because it's going to be from Indigenous participants with an Indigenous voice and perspective about education. So what I'm really about are the areas of potential, the links between knowledge systems. So, understanding that the importance of considering, acknowledging and including an Indigenous perspective is something that we need to look at to change what's happening at the moment and what's happened in the past. My background paper will be a conference publication, and it's about how Indigenous knowledge can directly link to teaching practice. Everything should be practical. Otherwise, the theory gets lost, all right? How can we apply things practically? So the relationships can be linked with being. Feedback can be linked with doing. Deeper content knowledge can be linked with knowing, and I've gone into detail in my paper with that. I've also been lucky enough to have my literature review presented. I presented it at a conference, and now it's going to be published. It's in publication at the moment. So that was about mainly how Indigenous knowledge can be directly linked to, and I gave an example of the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. If anyone hasn't seen that or doesn't know about that, it's what outlines how a teacher needs to engage in the Western education system, which is another hurdle for Indigenous people who maybe want to go into teaching, understanding how this is organised and what's expected of them within this system. So professional knowledge relates directly to knowledge. Professional practice relates to being. It's about how to be professional, how you are going to be ethical in your practice. But it also is about relationships, so it connects directly. Professional engagement is about doing. How are you going to do this thing that's teaching? So I tried to outline things like that clearly as an example of what I might be able to achieve with participants. So next is about, if I see this as an important thing or something to look at, will it be the same for other Indigenous people, other Indigenous pre-service teachers or other Indigenous teachers? We're going to find that out. We're going to answer the question. So as I said, publishing's been really important for me. I feel like I've had to sort of put myself out there, stamp, my sort of presence here in this space. And I've found that it helps to provide validation of your ideas because you get a peer review. If someone thought what you were saying was rubbish, you'd find out about it quickly. And having other Indigenous academics, famous, well-known Indigenous academics, look at my work has been rewarding. So it enables you to engage in a professional conversation about the topic and also the process that you're going to take. I found that it also has improved my writing, which is a good thing. And I'm looking at other possible publications. So perhaps teacher training resources. I've been approached for something perhaps the education department might want to use with teachers that are already in the classroom. And maybe a reflective paper too about using an Indigenous methodology, because that's still a growing field, about how we actually use this different kind of approach. And part of that Indigenous methodology is that Indigenous participants who will form the community that I'm working with, this thing can't be theoretical, it has to be practical, there's got to be a practical application. So how will I work with those participants to create something that benefits everyone? So there's going to be something, a project, something produced at the end that everyone will be acknowledged in as being a part of.